זה ייקח שנה ששיפוט, ועל מה אתה עושה בשיפוט שלנו. מה יהיה מפלגת העבודה? מפלגת העבודה היא מפלגה מאוד גדולה. מפלגה שתמשיך להיות במרכז הסיכוי מי באמת שזה ראש, לא ראש, האנשים שעושים הפתקאות עם בני גנץ את העבודה לא רוצים לוותר על העבודה. כלומר, אני לא יכול להיות פוליטיקה זה כאילו פוליטיקה מאחורי פוליטיקה רוסית. הציבור לא מבין, אני חושב שהמפלגה נעלמת, זאת אשליה. האנשים שכבר הופכים את הפודקאסטים המפלגה הייתה לא שקופה וגם בכנסת, עכשיו היא תהיה לא שקופה, היא כאילו לא נראית, אבל הרבה מהדברים החשובים שיקרו במפלגות משקיעים עמוקים בפוליטיקה שהמפלגה המפלגה של מפלגת אני לא חבר איתה, אבל זה דבר גם הדבר הזה מאוד מעניין. מה שקורה זה שהתרבות הפוליטית מפלגת העבודה היא שהמיעוט לא יוכל לקבל את ההצעות, וכשהוא רוצה לפעמים הוא עושה, איך אומרים, פלירטים של אהבה, יש לו פילגשיות, הוא מקים אותם יש מערים, עושה כמו שהוא רוצה שם, שזה מה שחשוב לאנשים, איך בסוף זה נגמר במרכז מפלגת העבודה. אני חושב שהמטרה עכשיו, זה לא שום דבר שאתה אמר, עכשיו היא להביא מדעתי, אנחנו לא מבינים במשרד ראשות הממשלה, Professor Joppke, you have a secret since 2013. And what the man is, yeah, the French restaurant. That's right, I know. Exactly. Yes, very good. Well, I look forward to your comments today. Okay. 6 years on. No, maybe it was 2015.
I sound very friendly.
Always testing you. Testing you.
Yeah. Yes. Just moving around.
We're not exactly because we are circulating. We are. So many things. They're basically none of that how institutions would improve efficiency. Political economy is about power and distribution. It's about Well, that's the way I see it. That's the way I see it. That's the way I see it. So that it's a different challenge. So the political economists would say they never did. They were simply envoys of those who really did. They just sent the economists to you, and they used the economists to convince you that it's for the benefit of all, but it was always for the benefit of the few. That's the way. Good. So I look forward.
Shall we? Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this conference. I'm very happy about the cooperation, continuing cooperation that we have with the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung, and of course, social solidarity and populism is a very important and timely topic, and just back from social answers. I don't know if you can in these days where social solidarity is breaking in Israel and where populism is flourishing in Israel. This is really a very important topic. And this conference is held in the memory of Professor Karlheinz Schneider, who was actually an integral part of the University of Haifa. In his early days, he was in the Department of Sociology, then left to Germany, but in his later days, he came back to us and was a part of the Haifa Center for German and European Studies, and taught here for the last 8 years. Even after he got sick, he came here and taught, and he supervised several MA students, and really was an integral part of the center and the history of the University of Haifa. And I think that he would have liked very much that we dedicate this conference to social solidarity and populism to his memory. I want to invite our rector, Professor Gustavo Mesch, who knew Karlheinz Schneider from early days, to say a few words.
Okay. No, I know that both of them doesn't work, so it's okay. So, welcome to the University of Haifa and welcome to this conference. It is a real pleasure for us at the university to have all of you here and to enjoy this important conference. I want to say a couple of words about Karlheinz. I actually met Karlheinz for the first time in 2005, when he was already a chair of the department and he wanted to spend time in Israel. And then I realized how linked he is with the University of Haifa. Actually, he was probably one of the first professors to be hired at the University of Haifa because he started his career in the Department of Sociology in 1972, the same year of the Declaration of Independence of the University of Haifa. So actually, he was one of the first professors to be hired by the university. And at the Department of Sociology, he was part of a group, very interesting group, that actually shaped the early identity of the department. Because at the same time arrived a couple of people that he collaborated and worked together, like Eugene Wiener, Charles Kaiman, and Shlomo Zvirsky. And together, they, and later on, Sami Samocha and David Bernstein, and together they were the group that opposed the prevalent and hegemonistic paradigm of sociology in Israel, the structural functionalism of Eisenstadt. So they actually created at Haifa, the Department of Sociology, the critical school of Israeli sociology. And they worked together when Karlheinz was actually the leader of the courses in social theory. And he has very early on, in 1973, I believe, he produced together with Shlomo Zvirsky and Eugene Wiener a reader on sociological theory for the students. So they already collaborated there. And beyond theory, he took the teaching of religion. And he was very kind of trying to link ultra-Orthodox sociology of religion and Zionism. He was part of this group, and all this group was very much characterized by being people that have a very critical view of society. They were very good teachers, and they were very much liked by the students. And the story that I heard from a former graduate from the University of Haifa of those days, Professor Serge Born, that finished MA degree in sociology at the University of Haifa in '75. So he was probably the first cohort. And then he went to do a PhD in Manchester and become a professor of sociology in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil for many, many years. And he remembered these days as days in which the department was highly sensitive to society, highly involved in society, and highly involved with the turbulent years. I want to remind to all of us, 71, 72, Black Panthers in Israel, and the beginning of a new era, actually, in terms of the approach to society and to the disadvantaged groups. Later on, and I must say that Karlheinz was actually linked to the University of Haifa even after he left. He left in 1977, and after that, he continued to come over to visit from time to time to teach in the Department of Sociology, and also collaborated with also a former member of the department that later on became a faculty member at the School of Education, Boaz and Fishman. They wrote together a book on that is called Radicals Despite of Themselves, about ultra-Orthodox women going to work. And they published that in 2007, and he was around here for 5 years writing the book together with me. So Karl was really part of our history of the university in general, and certainly part of the history of the Department of Sociology, and it is founding group that actually was the one that created a different identity, was courage enough to go against the sociological establishment that was very powerful at that time, and engaged in a very good, important academic art. Thank you, and I apologize for in a couple of minutes I have to leave because another meeting in the other campus.
Thank you very much, Professor Mesch. Karlheinz told me, by the way, that one of the reasons that he decided to leave Haifa in Israel is because the sociology department stopped to be radical enough for him. So everything is in perspective. The Haifa Center for German and European Study is an interdisciplinary center, and we are very happy to cooperate in this conference also with the School of Political Science of the University of Haifa. Unfortunately, the head of the school, Daphna, couldn't make it today. And we are also very happy to cooperate with the Israeli Association for the Study of the European Integration, which is in stakes today, and I invite Tal Sadeh to say.
Thank you. So I'm representing the Israeli Association for the Study of European Integration. As I say, when you study the positive, you also study the negative. So by the same token, it could be the study of European disintegration. So there's no problem with others. And so is Ayelet Banai, which is also a member of our executive committee. We encourage European Union studies across Israel. We hold seminars and annual meetings at various universities and colleges about once a month, mostly in the second semester. We encourage all of you who are interested in European Union studies to become members of our association. You can find us online, and to, of course, attend our meetings. Those of you who are still students could find us through this activity potential supervisors for advanced studies, potential jobs as teachers of European Union, or collaborators in books or research. This is what we have, why we have academic associations. Today's topic is very important. As those of you who are following European Union business know, the European Union has been greatly politicized. We say it's politicized because it used to be not political. It was not political up until the 1990s because it was dealing with what was perceived to be technical issues that you normally don't care too much about. For example, your local fire department is not political because you just assume the firemen to know what they're doing, hope so at least. And you don't think this is something that you need to vote over, or you need to get involved in how the fire department runs its business. You just need to have qualified firefighters to do the job. So that's not a political issue. For as long as the European Union was about technical issues of that, like firefighting or other things, mostly about economic issues, trade, patents, standards, and so forth, the public was not interested and not involved. Things took a turn with the Maastricht Treaty, because that's where the European Union began to be involved in integrating core state powers, a single currency, a single citizenship or parallel citizenship. And this process of integrating core state powers, also foreign and security policy, and many other issues, gained some pace with successive treaties of the 1990s and the 2000s. It seemed okay for a while because there was no immediate crisis, but apparently the financial crisis, the euro crisis, ushered in a different period where people all of a sudden woke up to this reality and began demanding to be more involved. And that means that domestic politics started to intrude on European Union business, on the dynamics inside the Council of Ministers, in the way the Commission pursues its mandate. And the European Parliament became a focus of much more lively politics. Recently, with the more skeptical movements on the rise, we have seen a rise, unprecedented rise in the turnout in the elections to the European Parliament. People began to be very much interested, not least those who are skeptical. And the power of integration is such that even the skeptics are actually part of the process. They just want the European states to say how they don't like it, but they're not talking about taking down the European edifice. So this is a victory of sorts for those who support integration. And this ushered in new theories. We long had the neo-functionalist theory arguing that integration is an inevitable consequence of crisis resolution. The crises are part of the process. As they arrive, they make people realize that something needs to be solved, and then smart people convene, produce a solution, and so we go from crisis to crisis in a very good way. This is how things progress, and it's all for the benefit of all. The liberal intergovernmentalist school highlighted the role of governments, of bargaining, and distinctively from political realism, showed that even small states could have a good bargain. They can play the rules of bargaining inside the European Union. So this is not a European Union dominated by any single particular member state. And now, about a decade, we have post-functionalism as the third main theory on European integration, which is a more skeptical or cynical theory. It's about how the European Union is very political. Here we study how domestic politics takes cues and relates to events on the European stage, and how, on the other hand, the European stage responds to public demands. And we see that some of the center parties, or the mainstream parties, adopt some of at least the slogans, if not the agenda, of the more extremist party in order to fight electorally the extremist party. So either by voting them in, or by having their ideas infiltrate the mainstream, the more the non-mainstream parties are having their effect. In this regard, I think, again, the seminar today is promising to be a very interesting one. Populism has been one of those intruding ideas on the European stage, and we are in the midst of this important wave, and its consequences are not yet foreseen, and we have not seen the last of it, not a bit. But I think I can say by now that it is contained, in the sense that it is part and not a obstacle to European integration, but simply wants to steer the ship in a different way that we not necessarily like, but it's part of the story. So with that, I'll give the stage to Micky.
Thank you very much, guys. I'm puzzled to say that the European Union became political only with the Maastricht Treaty. It was political from the very beginning, in the sense that its political idea was peace, and its economic policy was capitalism, basically, or some sort of capitalism. And we talk about social solidarity. This might be one of the reasons of the problem with the European Union, as well as these very, very, daily things of controlling your garbage collection. This is also something that is connected to politics and solidarity. Anyway, our third partner for this conference is the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung, and I'm very happy that Micky from the foundation, a long 20 years in the foundation in Israel, is here with us. Micky, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Eli. Okay, I see that Professor Mesch has already left. Okay, dear Eli, dear Dr. Tal Sadeh, dear Professor Salzberger. Dr. Tal Sadeh, he didn't mention it, but he's the former co-president of the Israeli Association for the Study of European Integration. This should be acknowledged. Yes, and a very good co-president, I have to say. Dear distinguished speakers from abroad, thank you for coming to Israel and attending our meeting here, dear colleagues and friends. We are now in the 7th year of excellent cooperation with the Association for the Study of European Integration. Thank you, Tal, for this great partnership between us. The aim of this series is to assist in promoting the understanding of European integration in Europe among academics, governmental officials, and the wider public in Israel. We hold the events in leading universities, like today at the University of Haifa, but also at academic colleges and institutions, with the aim to facilitate exchanges of decision makers and experts, thus introducing each other's viewpoints into the public discourse. Together, the partners, we choose relevant topics like the one we are discussing today. One of the strategic targets of the FAS Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung work in Israel is strengthening Israeli-European alliances and disseminating information about the EU and Israel and vice versa. This is very important since Israeli-European relations are complex and ambivalent. We try to introduce European viewpoints into this Israeli discourse and Israeli viewpoints into the European one. Now, some words about today's challenging topic. Social inequality is one of the defining issues of our time. If we compare the social situation, for example, of the mid-80s to today, we see a clear increase in inequality practically in all rich countries. And some research suggests that this development leads to the rise in right-wing populism we experience at the moment. One significant answer to this challenge, dear friends, is solidarity. But what does solidarity mean in the context of the EU? In my opinion, it means that all Europeans should have the same opportunities, regardless of their, for example, their citizenship. And it were the social democratic parties in Europe who have historically been fighting to achieve this goal. Unfortunately, social democracy itself is facing a major crisis. The Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung is trying to support the relevant movements and parties in overcoming this crisis and reach a situation where the EU becomes an endeavor truly built on solidarity. Now, what does all this have to do with Israel? Well, a lot more than it seems at the first sight. There are intense relations between Israel and the EU, which means that changes on one side will indirectly affect the other one as well. As you probably know, Israel suffers from even higher social inequality than many countries of the EU. So it might be rewarding for us Israelis to take a look at the way other places try to deal with this problem. Maybe by doing so, Israel can find ways to deal with the particular challenges it faces. So I wish us all looking forward for the fruitful discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Micky. And to conclude this opening welcoming session, I want to invite our lector, Julia Machado, to present to say farewell to some of the members of the center who are leaving us this end of this academic.
Yes, thank you. Yes, as you know, we do great conferences on very interesting topics. We have an MA, we have a PhD program. We're doing a lot of work on this field, but we also have German courses. And we teach German language to many students and faculty members of the university. And two of our colleagues had their last day today, so we wanted to take this opportunity to say goodbye and thank them very much for their work at the center with the students, with teaching German language. And yes, Marion and Julia, would you come just So Marion was joined us for 1 year, 2 semesters, and she is with the Zentralstelle für Auslandsschulwesen, which is a German-funded organization who mainly deals with German in schools. And Julia was a DIAD language assistant for 1 year at the center, and is now going to stay in Israel, as Marion as well, doing her PhD. Vielen Dank. Thank you very, very much for your time. We want very together with the students. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we can move to the first part again.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to start the first of 2 panels of this workshop. But before I'm going to present the speakers, I also want to say that as a member of the School of Political Science and the Center for European Studies at the University of Haifa, and since last year also on the Executive Committee of the Association for the Study of European Integration, I'm particularly happy about this joint workshop. And also about topic which we're going to deal with today. And there is a claim that's been claimed for some decades now that the European Union, although some may argue was non-political in certain stages, was nevertheless having important political effects already in the 1980s and the 1990s. One of which was that because of its focus on economy, on competition, on integration of markets, it's neglected in some ways things related to social politics, social justice, maybe, or to redistribution of the wealth and opportunities. And this is the claim goes. Didn't start now, but it's been developing for a while over the decades, and in a way might be one of the reasons that social democracy today faces serious challenges. So this is one claim that we thought can be important to revisit and ask whether we did see this development. And the other related is the claim that we find both in scholarship and in the media about the socio-economic roots of populism. Some claim that this is one of the explanations to the rise of populism, the growing inequalities within and among European countries. So this, in a way, the two claims that bring the topic together of the title of this workshop, yeah, social solidarity in the European Union, addressing the challenge of populism. Is there a connection and how it looks like? And of course, I'm very happy to have such distinguished speakers to talk about this in our first panel. And in the second panel, we will have speakers from the practitioner side of the story, from trade unions, and of course, we will present them later on. So our first speaker is Professor Ester Herlin-Karnell from now the University of Uppsala, but until very recently the Free University of Amsterdam. She's a professor of law dealing with EU and public law issues related to integration of justice policies, of things related to immigration and asylum law and to criminal justice in the EU. So we'll have this perspective, and we'll be followed by Professor Joppke from the University of Bern, who is one of the leading sociologists in Europe dealing with immigration. He has one of the classic books, Immigration in the Nation State, from 1999, and of course a very large number of other important publications. And then my colleague from the School of Political Sciences in Haifa, Professor Annabel, will comment on the two papers. So Esther.
I should stand up here. So thank you very much. It's great to be here, and it's very lovely views as well. So, and I should say that I'm currently visiting Professor Uppsala, just to be clear on that. But I just left Amsterdam and moved back to Sweden, and that's also, I think that's also highlights European feeling here, that I'm actually at the European and German Study Center, being Swedish national, was until February in the Netherlands, and now in Israel, and back to Sweden. So thanks for the invitation. So I will focus my presentation on EU integration and solidarity. And I should also say that, and as Ayelet also said it, I'm a lawyer, so probably I will take a little bit different perspective on politics of European integration. So let's imagine we would ask the following question: what would serve as a basis of solidarity and common understanding among people of diverse nationalities? This is something that global justice people very often ask themselves, but actually it's something that European scholars very rarely discuss, because it's taken for granted we have solidarity in the European Union. But as a previous panel highlighted, now the disintegration trend is very visible. And with the migration crisis, financial crisis, and all the different crises that are going on in the European Union, there seems to be very little solidarity at present. And solidarity, especially social solidarity, is very interesting in the context of the EU, because the EU represents a very good case study of what it means to discuss transnational solidarity. So in the EU context and in the legal context, solidarity is part of the founding values of the European Union. So if you look in Article 2, for example, in the Treaty of the European Union, it says that the EU is based on the values of solidarity, human rights, and the rule of law, and democratic values.
And for those of you who are familiar to the EU Court's case law on EU citizenship and on EU free movement law, and also in the area of mutual recognition in European arrest warrant cases, for example, solidarity is a very strong notion, and the EU Court of Justice assumes that there is a solidarity. So, for example, the Court of Justice has, at a number of occasions, said that there is a high degree of trust and solidarity among the member states. That's very interesting. So, the Court of Justice assumes that if it says there is solidarity, there is solidarity. And this is then a challenge to critical scholars trying to make sense of what does it mean to refer to solidarity, especially now with themes like Brexit and other national sentiments across Europe. If we look at the situation in Poland and Hungary, for example, where the European Council has actually launched Article 7 procedure and said that these member states do not comply with the rule of law. And that's another question, follow-up question to the rule of law is then, can there be solidarity? Or, can there be the rule of law, or can we say that the rule of law is fulfilled if there is not enough solidarity? But solidarity is not just a social justice question in the context of the European Union. If we look at, for example, a common asylum and integration area and also security regulation in the area of freedom, security and justice, in Article 67, it says that, among other things, that the EU should establish an area of freedom, security, and justice. It also says that the EU should aim to achieve a migration policy that's based on solidarity. And the whole idea of open borders with the Schengen Agreement in 1985 is currently put to the test. How we can make sense of European integration in the field of disintegration, feelings, and a lack of solidarity. So my question is then, is solidarity different from the idea of justice in the European Union? And as the previous speaker said, no, I forgot the professor's name, the last speaker in the previous panel, he said that solidarity in the European Union should mean that everyone has the same prospects, that equality is respected. And that, I think, is also very interesting in the context if we think of EU citizenship, because the idea of EU citizenship is exactly that. That no matter what nationality you have, you should be able to benefit from European integration by just being a citizen of the EU. And that raises further interesting questions, because is solidarity restricted to the European Union, and what obligations do the EU have to outsiders? If we take a cosmopolitan-based idea of justice, it's a bit challenging to explain why is justice and solidarity confined to the EU area. Another interesting example about the vocabulary of solidarity is, for example, the idea of collective self-defense. So in Article 222 in the Treaty of the Functioning of the EU, and in Article 42, Paragraph 7 in the Treaty of the EU, there is a solidarity provision that says that if a member state is the object of a terrorist attack, for example, or a natural disaster, some kind of catastrophe, then the other member states in the EU has a solidarity obligation to help that state. And recently, with the terrorist bombings in France in 2015, we saw the solidarity provision actually being invoked. So France used the vocabulary of solidarity, saying that now other member states, you have to help us to bomb targets in Syria, for example, where IS is based, because this is self-defense, so this is collective self-defense. But in the end, France said this is a solidarity provision. Every states in the EU have to help us, but in the end, they invoked the mutual assistance provision, which meant that it was easier to get through the permission to actually use solidarity. It's a little bit similar to using Article 51 in the UN Charter, that have to go through a permission and a political negotiation in the Parliament and the Council if you choose Article 222. This is part of the technical vocabulary that was discussed in the earlier section, or in the earlier panel. So the EU represents an interesting case study as it actually offers a tailor-made example of testing the power of solidarity. So solidarity then means different things. It's a very context-based notion, because solidarity at the EU supranational level is about vertical solidarity between the member states and equality between the member states. But then it's also solidarity question at a horizontal level. So member states also have to justify to individual citizens. And it's there's a very complicated relationship in European Union law, which between state, the EU, and the individual, which I think is very unique to EU law integration. And when it comes to the idea of justifying EU action, I think it's very fascinating when one looks at the meaning of solidarity, because very often solidarity means that the EU gets more powers, or that the member state have to justify to the EU why it's not complying with EU law. But it's not so often that the EU has to justify to member state or to individual citizens why the EU as a supranational organization will not show solidarity. If we think of, for example, about the deal with Turkey, about keeping asylum seekers out of Europe, or things like that, it's challenging from the perspective of what a solidarity really means. So I say that solidarity is not only a social question or a social justice question. It's also a security regulation question in the European Union. But still, most scholars analyzing solidarity, like Andrea Sangiovanni, for example, is a very well-known political theorist. He says that the concept of solidarity could be divided in roughly two parts. The first part defines principles for relation between member states, which is member state solidarity, and the second part concerns the relationship between European citizens and residents. That's transnational solidarity. So what does then solidarity mean in the context of security? So take, for example, the question of migration governance, or the fight against terrorism, or the fight against transnational crime. The member states can, at the moment, not agree on the quotas, asylum law quotas or migration law quotas. So we have the EU is stuck with the Dublin Regulation 3 that was adopted in 2013, which means that the first state that an asylum seeker comes to, which is usually Greece or Italy, is a state that should deal with their asylum applications, which means that other member states should then send back an applicant to these states. And this has been criticized for being a very a very unfair solution if we discuss solidarity within the European Union. And especially, and not only which member states are the ones that will manage the applications, but also that states like Germany, for example, and Sweden are the ones that have been the choice of destination for many migrants. And I think that's a challenging solidarity question, how if they cannot agree on a quota, or they cannot agree on who or relocate money within the European Union, you can't agree on anything, then it seems that there is not much solidarity with regard to EU asylum law. And the language of solidarity is also very present in, for example, the migration agenda 2015, and also the security agenda 2015. And these are political policy documents that the EU draws up, which sets out the future security agenda for the EU to politically pursue. And the EU uses the vocabulary of solidarity in a very interesting way, especially for people interested in European integration, because it uses it as a loyalty obligation. So if member states are not complying with solidarity, then the EU integration is wanted. And that just to finish my presentation, I think I'm running out of time, is that the challenge for the EU in the future is then, is solidarity an empty notion? Does it make more sense to first discuss what is justice in the European Union? And then once the EU knows what is justice within the area of freedom, security, and justice, then have a more a justice-based notion of solidarity that informs how we should ask the member states to actually comply with the demands. I'm finished, I think.
We'll take our questions together after the presentations of the comments. So directly, the floor is yours, Professor Joppke. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Esther talked a little bit about the European Union. I talk more about the populism part, and then it's to the intelligent listeners to get these two pieces together. More concretely, I will reflect on the causes and implications of Europe's populist surge and whether it signals a decline of liberalism. That is part of a larger book that I have 3/4-ish finished. The concrete notes were put together for actually a Japanese kind of intellectual magazine that it appeared this month, and it was never meant to be for a European or English-speaking audience. Therefore, I think it is worthwhile to make you endure it. If you look at the causes of the populist surge in rich societies, Europe included, a good beginning is the so-called elephant curve by economist Branko Milanovic. He worked for the World Bank at the time when he came up with this interesting paper and was then developed into a book. This elephant curve depicts the real income increases of the world population divided by income percentiles between 1988 and 2008. That is the period commonly known as globalization. The famous graph, indeed, which has the shape of an elephant, carries three central messages. First, the world's lower to middle income groups, corresponding roughly to the still poor or middling populations of India and China, they have seen massive income increases in exactly this period. They were lifted out of extreme poverty. This is the steeply rising and massively extended back of the elephant. Secondly, in the higher range of the global income distribution, in particular around the 18th percentile, that corresponds to the rich world's working and lower middle classes. Here there has been zero income increase or even income loss during this period of globalization. And that is the elephant's lower trunk part, if you like, that basically touches the ground. And thirdly, the third message, at the highest 99th to 100th percentiles, which represents the world's richest and ultra richest, most of them in Europe and in North America, here you have seen massive income increases. That is the elephant's triumphant trunk that is pointing to the sky. In plain words, globalization has jointly helped the Western world's super rich and significant portions of the third world's poor. And the connecting factor between both, of course, are the production jobs of globally operating companies that have moved from high to low wage countries. And globalization's proverbial loser or losers are the Western working and lower middle classes, who are still rich, of course, by global standards, but who have seen their fortunes stagnate or even decline, while much of the world, most spectacularly the Western super elite, has moved up. Now, as a result of that, one of liberalism's core principles or tenets, which is optimism, which is faith in human progress. It is no longer with large segments of the Western class structure. An interesting poll in 2017 by the Pew Research Center promptly found out 5 European countries, they provided the lowest yes answers to the question whether their children would be better off financially than their parents. And at the very bottom of this scale, only 9% of French believed that their children would do better than their parents. And interestingly, at the top end of this Pew survey scale, at the top end were Vietnam and India, 2 big winners of globalization, were vast majorities, 95 and 76% respectively, were financially hopeful. So they thought their children indeed will do better than they themselves. The massive loss of hope in the future, the fear of falling, extends wide into the middle classes. This is the crucible of European populism. The world's leading liberal news magazine, The Economist, has diagnosed this populism as an all-out attack against the self-serving liberal elite system that has not served ordinary people well. Actually, the same diagnosis that Alexander Gauland would provide to the issue. Now, paradoxically, while the economic root causes of populism, they are incontrovertible. Still, it is mostly expressed not in economic terms, but in cultural terms, as a new politics of identity, particularly nationalism, that has come to replace the old politics of class. And for this stands the demise, the near extinction of leftist and socialist parties in Europe, which once had advocated equality and redistribution. Now, the new working class parties, that will be painful for the gentleman from the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung to hear, in terms of demographic support structure, are right-wing populist parties that advocate nativism and the bashing of immigrants. This calibration of economic and cultural factors, this is an unresolved puzzle in the explanation of populism. Who brings that puzzle together wins the prize. And there's much going for both explanations, an economic and a cultural one. Economic historian Barry Eichengreen, in a recent book, plausibly points out that, I quote him, populist revolts rarely arise in good economic times. In fact, in the age of moderation, as Eichengreen calls it, that is roughly the Trente Glorieuses, 1950 to 1975, the golden age of welfare capitalism, where growth was strong and all boats were raised, there had been no populism around, neither in Europe nor in North America. But it is also plausible to argue, now with Francis Fukuyama in a recent book, that Europe's predominantly right-wing populism is a response, he argues, to identity politics. The identity politics of the multicultural left. I quote him, identity politics gives rise to political correctness, opposition to which has become a major source of mobilization on the right. So in a nutshell, following Fukuyama, populism is white identity politics, in which the traditional way of life, the homely habitat of a once dominant ethnic majority, is sidelined into stagnant flyover zones. That is defended against the cosmopolitan urban elite that pushes immigrants and all sorts of minority interests. Accordingly, the defense of rooted Heimat against an unrooted new urban elite and globalist class, that is central to German populist leader Alexander Gauland's auto-analysis of populism that recently appeared in the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. However, next to economic, next to cultural factors, there's also a political factor to consider in the rise of European populism. And that is the disappearance of alternatives within the political party system. The decline of majoritarian over non-majoritarian institutions also within the political system at large. The conservative British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, when she embarked on a neoliberal revamping of state and society now some 40 years ago, she remarked famously, "There is no alternative." Henceforth, that became known as the Tina principle. There is no alternative to a market economy. And her Labour successor, Tony Blair, he proved to be her faithful disciple when he declared that it is as pointless to question globalization as it is to question the succession of the seasons. Most West European countries are ruled by a party transcending elite consensus. A consensus around free market values, a slimmed welfare state. The Social Democrats perfected that game, and the positive valuation of diversity. Of course, we are all diverse. The elite subscribes to the project of openness, to which nationalist populists offer the fundamental alternative of closure. Now, at the same time, within the state, who rules? Experts rule, most visibly in the form of non-democratic institutions like central banks, like constitutional courts. And these courts are particularly disliked because they defend capricious rights of the individual and minority interests over majority preferences. In Europe, non-democratic expert rule is epitomized by the supranational institutions of the EU, which, next to immigrants, have become the favored target of populist mobilization. One could speak here of a dissociation of liberal democracy. We always think that is a homogeneous project. No, this seemingly homogeneous project has fractured into its liberal versus democratic halves. And undemocratic elite liberalism is now confronted by and with illiberal populists who claim to take democracy by its word. The populist cause, then, of course, is mightily supported, that is never a factor to forget here, by a new reality of internet-based social media, which allow leaders and followers to communicate directly. But as we know, in these famous or ill-famed segmented echo chambers of the like-minded that breed radicalization and the distorted perception of the world. In sum, rising economic inequality, cultural indignity, political expert rule, combined with a new media-based shortcutting of political communication. These are the main factors that drive populism in Europe. But all these things drive populism in developed Western societies elsewhere. So what can we specifically say about Europe? What are the implications for liberalism there? Now, a European specificity is a high degree of regional variation of populism. One axis is the north versus south axis. Northern populism is right-wing. Southern populism is left-wing. The economist Danny Roderick has argued recently that this variation is because of the ways in which, as he says, globalization shocks make themselves felt in society. Either in the form of immigration and the loss of control over borders, which leads to rightist populism around the cultural cleavage, that's the northern pattern, or in the form of international trade and finance and the loss of control over money, as most drastically, of course, in the EU IMF imposed austerity regime over Greece in 2010, which has been conducive to leftist populism around the class cleavage. Despite their differences, left and right populists are astonishingly similar in their self and crisis diagnosis. For right-wing populist Alexander Gauland, the rise of a joint pro-market, pro-diversity globalist class that denigrates the pride and interest of the sedentary, die Sesshaften, this calls for fundamental opposition, his word, that may be left and right, but necessarily populist it has to be. For left-wing populist Chantal Mouffe, a recent interesting book she wrote under the title For Left Populism, for her, in this current post-democratic condition, as she calls it, all mainstream parties, those of the left included, have subscribed to the values of neo-globalization, or neoliberal globalization, and to technocratic non-politics. Accordingly, she thinks, the revitalization of democracy has to be by way of a competition between right-wing and left-wing populism. These two players, she thinks, are central to current politics. However, again, whether left or right, populism it has to be, as the people stand to be mobilized against the oligarchy. These are Chantal Mouffe's words. And Mouffe, interestingly, she even applauds rightist populists for understanding the role of emotions and for understanding that politics is always partisan and requires an us-them confrontation, as she writes. And she urges the left to recognize a democratic nucleus, her word again, in right-wing populist demands. At the same time, both populisms, left and right, remain sharply distinct. There is no place in the leftist variant of populism, as in Mélenchon's La France Insoumise, that Mouffe, of course, likes best. There's no place here for the anti-immigrant and the anti-Muslim animus that taints its rightist version. So that is the left versus, that is the north versus south axis. There's, of course, a second axis in which there's a lot of variation in populism in Europe, the east versus west. Importantly, Eastern populists hold government power in the countries you name. By contrast, with the exception of Italy, where a left-wing populist coalition rules since 1 year or so, in Western EU states, populists, they are, that's always important to see, only an electoral minority. They don't exceed anywhere the 20% mark. In the East, by contrast, so strong are the populists that often the main opposition to populist government is itself populist. And the example here is the Hungarian Jobbik party, which has moderated its trademark anti-Semitism since the ruling Fidesz party of Prime Minister Orban has excelled at this anti-Semitism. So competition for who is the best anti-Semit is kind of the dividing line in Hungarian politics these days. A further difference is that Western populism, in confrontation with an illiberal Islam, has sometimes adopted a surprisingly liberal profile that you don't find among Eastern populists. They advocate the rights of homosexuals and gender equality. By contrast, Eastern populism, which grows out of authoritarian and insufficiently liberalized post-communist societies, openly advocates illiberal democracy, to quote Orban. I leave out the section here and jump because my time is running out. The different realities of European populism, they forbid an easy answer to our central question, or the question of this brief intervention here, whether populism marks a decline of liberalism. In Eastern Europe, liberalism never was, in terms of culturally modernized societies with a strong individual rights infrastructure. Within the European Union, the joining of which is premised on subscribing to the values of democracy, the famous Copenhagen criteria, it is a curious spectacle that some Eastern member states, which are not beneficiaries, which are net beneficiaries of EU regional funds, they openly trample these values. the nuclear option of Article 7 of the European Treaty, because it allows sanctioning member states that violate these EU's fundamental values, but one other state is enough to disagree and to wreck the option. And two illiberal member states may then form a mutually immunizing duo so that never anything will happen. In Western Europe, the electoral minority status of most populist parties, that of course limits the transformative powers it can have or the threat it poses for liberalism. It must also be conceded that contemporary populist parties, they are not anti-democratic, they are not anti-system, they don't advocate political violence. They work fully within the parameters of parliamentary democracy. They don't abolish it, I don't want to abolish it, but only to counterbalance this democracy with elements of direct democracy, that is the referendum. I will skip another part to come to the conclusion. It's really making me sweat here. I'm sweating for natural reasons, but also for internal organic reasons. On their trademark subject, immigration and Muslims, the main effect of Western populist parties, what are their main effects? How effective actually are these Western populists? Surprisingly little. I write an entire book. The book is not so much about populism. The book is really about how has populism changed its trademark policy domains, which is immigration policy and citizenship policy. And the answer to that is surprisingly little. They have surprisingly little effect on that. Most restrictive changes in immigration policy and citizenship policy happened before populists were on the map. They were engineered mostly by center-right majority parties, not by these radical right parties. Now, far from making liberalism decline or retreat, populism may have the exact opposite effect, to reinforce liberal values among centrist elites and their voters, who then kind of close ranks against the illiberal threat. This has been the logic of Angela Merkel's stubborn defense of open borders in the 2015 refugee crisis. This, of course, it fired populism, not just in Germany. The AfD wouldn't be thinkable without it. It fired it all over Europe, up to Sweden. But therefore, or thereby, this dynamic also reinforced the stamina of those who happen to disagree. So while not signaling kind of meaning the end of liberalism, populism undoubtedly reinforces, of course, a deep polarization of Western European societies. Now, what can we do about that? And that's my last 20 seconds. The least to say is that the frequent notion of populist moment, all my colleagues talk about populist moment, this is a completely inappropriate word for what is happening, because it misrecognizes the long-term structural factors that are driving populism in Europe and elsewhere in the West. Populism is here to stay. This is because inner social inequalities are going to increase as globalization marches on. And of course, it will not stop for the time being, as long as technological change accelerates. Only wait for the globotics upheaval, about which a Swiss political economist has written a fascinating book recently. Immigrants will continue to arrive, and they will continue to upset dominant ethnic majorities. Politics will remain a despised profession, a profession exercised by people who live off rather than for politics, and who are suspected of being both aloof and corrupt. For the center to hold, a new balance between closure and openness has to be found. President Macron, when he was still optimistic and our love object, he made a beginning with this indeed very smart formula: une Europe qui protège, an Europa das
schützt, a Europe that protects, in a way to outwit populism on its own domain. That will be the key challenge for the future.
I'm sure you have many questions, so keep them for a bit longer, and I'm honored to invite my colleagues.
Good afternoon. I would like to thank the organizers of this conference, and in particular Ayelet, for inviting me to be part of this discussion. I'm here as a discussant. I'm not sure exactly of what it means. I'm never sure of what it means to be a discussant, but you know, French academics have this new cute way to say rebondir, to bounce or to rebound on the paper instead of saying response. They say rebondir. So I'm going to bounce on you in a way or another. So that's what I'm going to try to do. My perspective will be neither historical, nor sociological, nor legal, nor empirical, nor even normative in any sense. So you will ask what's left. And indeed, what I have to say is extremely partial and incomplete and doesn't take into account all kinds of events and processes. I will try to formulate questions for which I don't have any answer, using part of what you said as a starting point. I'd like to start with the contradiction or the opposition that's in the title of our panel, integration, populism, solidarity. They can be, of course, solidarity with integration and even solidarity with populism, but not so much integration with populism. Populism is never about real integration, because it's always about the division between outside and inside, between friends and enemies. And by the way, I think it's right for both right-wing populism and left-wing populism. This opposition is also that between right-wing populism, what you call Christian populist nationalism, and justice. As we know, and that doesn't need to be explained further, one of the methods and one of the goals of populism everywhere in Europe today is to attack justice, or more exactly to attack justice as an institution and as an idea, and maybe not so much justice itself, but a certain story of justice. They're not against a theory of justice, but maybe against a certain narrative that comes together with justice. And I would suggest that this attack against justice is less against models of justice and rather than against the universalist background story of the idea of justice. This opposition is also that between the rule of law and specific laws that are made possible precisely by the rule of law, but that endanger it at the same time. Therefore, we're talking about the opposition between liberal democracy and the anti-liberal changes or demands that are made everywhere in the so-called liberal world. And I won't use the word liberal that much, more the word neoliberal world, which I think is more accurate today. So these different ways to formulate these oppositions are very well known, and there's hardly any book today in sociology or political science that doesn't mention them. Since I'm a theorist, I would like to reformulate these oppositions as the opposition between two well-known conceptions of politics. And these conceptions have been developed by two famous French philosophers. One is Claude Lefort, and the other is Michel Foucault. And very basically, the question that I'm going to ask is about the place of power in our society. And even more basically, my argument or my suggestion will be that one of the causes of populism is an essential dissonance in modern life about the place of power. I won't give, of course, the whole context and argument of Lefort's understanding of politics, just this. For Lefort, the state is the manifestation of power, but in democracy, the power has a very paradoxical nature. On the one hand, it belongs to the people, and on the other hand, because it belongs to the people, it stands in an empty state, empty space, or it is a priori empty. It sounds complicated, but in fact, it means something very simple.
the manifestations of power, the functions of power, do not essentially belong to anyone. They are like empty rooms. Think of the Prime Minister's office, the President's Oval Office. They are empty rooms in which people succeed to each other. The room itself is empty by definition. The power doesn't belong essentially to anyone. People are moving, getting in and out one after the other. It means that the power belongs to the people, and the people give the power for a certain amount of time and in certain conditions to different people. Okay, so it's a loan that we get for some time and in certain conditions. This is very easy to understand, and it is very well known, but still it's a paradox, and even a double paradox. Why a paradox? Because first, the people know that the power belongs to them, but they cannot use it because it belongs to no one in particular. Second, the leaders know that the power doesn't belong to them, but they can use it because they are at a certain time and in certain condition in the room of power for a certain moment. For the four, this is a double paradox, and this paradox must stay in balance, must remain in balance. If the empty space of power becomes too empty, political power loses its legitimacy and disappears. All kinds of groups, lobbies, interests, etc., grows, and politics is dissolved in economic administration. On the other hand, if the empty space of power is invaded by a person or group, or even by the people as a whole, democracy itself disappears. So if you take a theorist like Jan Werner Müller, who read Le Fort and who quotes him in his books, in various books and articles on populism, populism is an expression of the popular wish to invade the empty space of power. And therefore, for Müller, populism is never about demanding more democracy, but always about destroying democracy. And Müller sees populism as something very close to totalitarianism. Now, if we switch to Foucault, as you know, Foucault sees things very, very differently. Foucault is not interested in defining democracy or its ontological features, its essential features. He's interested in how modernity functions in terms of way of life, in terms of effect or impact on people. And for Foucault, power never belongs to anyone or anything in particular. It belongs neither to the people nor to the leaders. Power is not an instrument of the state, but it's the processes through which our life is organized and channeled in all spheres, at work, in education, in health, in punishment, etc. Therefore, when we speak about power, there is no separation between the state and the rest of society. Power is exercised in all social processes, but never owned by anyone. It is power itself that creates our social categories, our behaviors, our norms. Where does power come from? Where we don't know. It's the modus vivendi of human communities. In a way, power is everywhere and it's anonymous. It is removed from agency and from structure. We are part of it in the sense that we are all moved, all directed by it, which doesn't mean that there are not dominated people and dominant people, but even these dominant and dominated people are results from power, from the strategies of power. For Foucault, power has always existed in this anonymous way. What changes in history? It's the forms that power takes. And in the modern world, power takes a form that is called neoliberalism. Neoliberalism is not an economic choice among others, but a general organization of power focused on human capital. In neoliberalism, the strategies of power focus on human behavior and human life. It's what Foucault calls biopower and biopolitics. It means that the manifestations of power organize our lives via the system of health, medicine, genetics, etc., via education, via culture, migration, consumerism, sexual identities, demography, prisons, etc. Everything is linked in a web of impact and effects that affects our lives. This is biopower. From that point of view, liberties and rights are not something to which people are entitled. or something granted and protected by laws or the rule of law, but they are expressions of strategies of power. More rights or less rights are in fact the result of calculation, economic calculation of profit from the point of view of human capital. Everything from birth control or the absence of birth control, to education, to sexual identities, to welfare or lack of welfare, to crime, to punishment, everything is economically explained, organized, and legitimized for profit only. So if we consider now another theorist like Wendy Brown, who founds her analysis of neoliberalism of Foucault, for Brown, in a neoliberal society, namely in a society that is an economic sphere of competition only, inequality replaces equality in the role and application of the law. And it's totally normal. There's nothing surprising in that. If we're in competition and everything is a question of competition and profit, there is no equality, and there will never be equality, because equality doesn't help for profit. So as a result, neoliberalism destroys liberal democracy and rights in general. In her new book that will come out in a few days, I think maybe next week, she will show that the result of this destruction is the rise of anti-democratic politics. Is the title of her new book that is supposed to be out on Amazon next week, I think. So if Jan Werner Müller explains populism in part thanks to Lefort, and Wendy Brown explains it in part thanks to Foucault, both see populism as anti-democratic. I wonder, however, whether one of the reasons for the rise of populism doesn't come from the gap between these two positions on democracy and on the modern society. Lefort and Foucault describe two very different things. The first, Lefort conceptualized the essence of democracy, the idea of democracy. The second describes the way things happen in the neoliberal democratic world. The difference between them is not that between theory and practice. It's not that Lefort would describe an ideal society and Foucault what really happens in everyday life. The difference is between what we imagine and what we experience. The difference is between our representation of collective life and our encounter with collective life. Both are part of our real life. Both are part of praxis, but one is imagination and the other is experience. In our representation of collective life, we, the people, own the power, and therefore the place of power is empty. That's the story we tell ourselves. That's the story the schools teach our children. That's the story we believe in, and that's the story we direct our lives according to it. Okay, and the politicians tell us the same story, not because they manipulate us. They manipulate us in all kinds of ways, of course, but they too believe in that story, specific story. They share this symbolic representation of power. We have this symbolic representation of power because people always have a symbolic representation of power. When they were kings, people believed that the body of the king was holy. It wasn't stupid. They were not stupid. They were not crazy. It was their way to have a symbolic representation of power. It wasn't false. It was what they believed at this time. Today, we believe in something else. We believe that we have the power and we distribute it to people who, get into specific rooms, and then out of these rooms, according to our vote and our decision. Since the Enlightenment, we imagine power in this second way, this democratic way. Power belongs to us. Its functions are empty rooms. But in everyday life, we experience something very, very different, something that has absolutely nothing to do with our representation of power. The neoliberal organization of the human capital, biopower. We are part of it. We are moved by it. We moved into it. And when we rebel against it, we are reintegrated into the system as a new source of profit. For instance, we buy T-shirts saying that we are against consumerism. Okay, that's a very easy example that we all know. Okay, so there's a dissonance between our representation of power and our everyday experience of it. It's not a contradiction between two stories, and we wouldn't know which one is the right one, and we would be confused. There's only one story. We are the power, but then there's what we are confronted with in every minute of our life. It seems to me that it is this dissonance that's the cause of current populism, which have, as Christian shows in his papers, very different ideologies. The question of populism, indeed, is not a question of ideology. It's a question of dissatisfaction with a reality that doesn't match the story that we tell ourselves, the story of power that we tell ourselves. Every version of anti-neoliberal populism seems to me an attempt to reactivate or to realize the story of power that we believe in against the reality of biopower. They are very different and even contradictory ways to do it. From, for instance, the Occupy movement in one side of the spectrum to the empowerment of the radical right parties on the other side of the spectrum. From, on the one hand, asking for more justice to all, from, on the other side, building walls against certain populations or certain part of the populations. The movements and events on the populist spectrum are different and even opposed to each other, but they are all based on the feeling that our collective life is based on a major lie. I don't think it's a lie. Politicians lie to us all the time. They are lies, but I don't think that this is a lie. I don't think that the neoliberal society is based on an intentional lie. I think that there's an incompatibility between a story that we like very much and that we don't want to abandon, and a way of life that, for all kinds of reasons, differs from that story. And therefore, I think that the big question, and with this I'm finishing, I think that the big question is what will eventually be changed? Will we succeed to keep our representation of power and transform our way of life in a way that fits that representation? Or will we finally have to tell ourselves another story of power that doesn't contradict our neoliberal experience? Thank you very much.
Thank again the three speakers for putting on the agenda solidarity in the context of law, populism in the context of politics, economy, and philosophy, and opening many interesting questions and issues, and of course for leaving us time also for questions from the audience. So the floor is open. If you have a question, raise your hand. I'll try to make it. Yes.
First, I want to make a correction, as I've been misinterpreted. I never meant to say the European Union did not have political goals from the beginning. Obviously, when the vision was for more peaceful and prosperous Europe. But I said it wasn't politicized at the domestic level. It was hard to get the people excited when they voted for parties and chose their leaders in their countries. This was never about Europe until at least the 1990s, and it's probably not until the 2000s. So this is what I'm referring to. So obviously, and certainly you can find politics in everything, but it is an interesting point about why would political agents choose to politicize an issue that hitherto was not politicized? And what makes it successful about it? I mean, I'm sure you have grievances about how this city runs its business, from garbage collection to real estate zoning to environmental regulation. Are you up in arms about it? You organize rallies about it. How furious are you about it? So sometimes people get, let things go by. Sometimes they get very excited about things. So this is actually, I think today, one of the major things on the agenda of studying this politicization is, what are the party cues? What are the situations, the conditions that turn Europe into something political, and for that matter, other issues? So that's one clarification. For Professor Joppke, I think there's an interesting difference between the east-west axis and the north-south one that you pointed. And I'd like your comments. Maybe I'm wrong, but my perception is that the Eastern populism is a lot about cultural conservatism. It's about the reassertion of the male white, and against the more gender emancipation of the West. It's more motivated by Orthodox religion or Orthodox interpretation of religion, whereas Northern populists often are very cool with gay rights or women rights. That's not the issue. They can be very chauvinist on a national level, but very liberal on a social level at the same time. So it's not the same kind of nationalism. And for Annabel, I was missing a comment about Polanyi in all of your talk. So there's a question of are we seeing a response to economic crisis or not? I think we're seeing a change in the major political divide. And that is because the old left-right division is dying for technological and generational reasons. And I think part of the confusion we're witnessing in politics, in democratic politics in this period, is that because we're in the middle of a phasing out of the old divisions and the phasing in of the new divisions, and it's not yet settled what kind of new divisions these will be. You see green parties making a big hit, or you see this populism, but they're not exactly opposite on the same, they're talking about different things, so they're not pure opposites to each other. But I wouldn't say it's because of the crisis. I'd say the crisis is the spark. It's the issue that got people rethinking these issues, but these are longer term processes that generate the new divides in the politics.
So then, I'll take one more question. Is that okay? Yeah? Asaf, all the way in the back.
I'm sorry about the English, first of all. My question is for Joppke. You talked a lot about how populist parties challenge the political and cultural aspects of liberalism or neoliberalism consensus. I wanted to ask you to talk, if you can, about how they challenge the economic consensus of the European Union. And for one of them, I wanted to ask if the reason for populism is the contradiction between the story and the practice of neoliberal existence, why does certain groups in society feel that contradiction similarly more and support populist parties, while other populations seem not?
Excellent English.
Yeah. So you'll answer that, and then we'll take a few more questions.
Sure. Tal, East versus West. There's so many variations here that are clearly worth to use much more deliberately about. One is this cultural conservatism, or they didn't have MC, they didn't have multiculturalism ever, and now they are, of course, totally freaking out if they see black skin. And in the West, we are all multiculturalists, even Alice Weidel. She lives in a gay partnership across the German-Swiss border, right? Pim Fortuyn was a card-carrying gay and all of that. He said, I should be afraid of Islam and Muslims. I sleep with Muslim boys. He defends himself. Right?
Our new Minister of Justice.
Yeah. I think one sort of variation one must put one's finger on. This is populists in the East, and that explains why they are so successful. They are pro-welfare. They resist shock therapy. Orban, Kaczynski, they entered the scene after Jeffrey Sachs had left. And he was voted into office by people who simply were caught by their pro-welfarist agendas. So that is a very important consideration, which is sometimes not observed in the scholarly literature, that there is a strong social democracy kind of
populism among Eastern leaders. Now, that talks to the question of how stand populists on economics. In a way, welfare chauvinism is everywhere their battle horse, and that's very interesting. Also in the West, actually, not just in the East. They're just so much more successful with that battle horse in the East because the East went through shock therapy that was so much more destructive of the social fabric than whatever Thatcher and Reagan had done in our lands. So, and here another interesting nuance, you know, the origin of radical right parties. They started as tax rebellions. They started as Autofahrerpartei in Switzerland. They started as kind of against the big state parties. So they have neoliberal origins. And in the Alternative for Deutschland, this is very visible. This was the creation of an economics professor from Hamburg who didn't like the euro, but only when the project changed towards welfare chauvinism on the one hand, and that deeply connected to the anti-Islam rhetoric, only then did they mobilize people. A more general remark. I think the crux of the issue of populism is the precarization, precarisierung of the middle class. I think that is the big issue. Indeed, Karl Marx to the rescue, really. I think that is the root cause of the current trouble. Look at the changes of taxation after the war. Progressive taxation. It had highest rates of some 85, 90% in the UK, in the United States. Now, if you have an income of 65,000 euros, a good middle class income, you're at the highest progression rate in most European countries, except Switzerland. Therefore, I like to live in Switzerland. But you see, something has happened here. What has happened is capitalism, the capitalists have broken the compact. It was not like Jürgen Habermas believed, legitimation crisis of late capitalism, that disaffected masses would run away from it. No, the capitalists, they broke the compact. Read Wolfgang Strebke, Gekaufte Zeit, Bought Time. It's just a kind of Polanyi of our time. He provides the analysis for this issue. And I shut up.
Okay. I'm not sure the problem is a question of crisis. The old new division between right and left. I mean, at this very moment, we have a feeling that we are in transition between an old definition and a new definition, but it's always a question of perspective. In 20 years, it will be a new transition between old and new. So I'm not sure. I think that it took time for the story of democracy to be told with the story of we have the power and we I think it took a long time to be totally accepted by everyone at a popular level, at the top. I mean, if you look, democracy, liberal democracy has what? 200 years, and of course not 200 years in Europe. So if you look at since when European countries and in general countries in the world have a liberal democracy, it's nothing. It's very, very short time. So it took some time to be totally accepted. Now the story is accepted. I mean, we have the feeling it's our story, but everywhere we don't feel that power at all. So I think the dissonance comes from here, and it's not a question of a change of left and right or a crisis or I don't think at least it's connected to that. Now, why do some people feel it more and some people feel it less? Because the people who are part of the profit game and gain from that neoliberal game have nothing to complain about. But it doesn't mean that tomorrow they won't have anything to complain about. I mean, they can have something to complain about in a week. Populism touches everyone at some point, or is potentially can potentially touch anyone at some point. And if the problem is in the middle classes and taxation and everything, so you know, everyone at some moment can be led to complain about the fact that we thought we have some power, and in fact we have no power at all, and we are. So I think that populism in this is very dynamic and moving, and including some people and then less people. And at some moment, who said, "Did you say that we stopped in the first panel?" One of the speakers said that we can be contained. I don't think that it's contained at all. I mean, it has been contained on the underlying European elections, but tomorrow it can come back very, very strongly because of what the market will do and what the profit demands will ask of people. So I'm not sure it has. I mean, it has been contained at this very moment, but maybe not very soon.
Thank you. Ellie, did you want to ask a question? Okay, Dani, please, you go ahead and I'll also ask.
All right, thank you. Professor Joppke, I'm happy to hear that you're very positive about populism not being the end of democracy. And I do agree with you with everything that I read so far. But let's talk about the populists actually participating in democracies, right? How would they affect the rights and policies? Because I've looked into immigration and integration policies, and here you see the populists mostly affect policies regarding foreigners coming into a country, so border control, those kinds of things, which you already mentioned was indeed already set in motion before that. We know, for example, that Bill Clinton was the first one who started talking about building fences between Mexico and the United States. But if these parties, these populist parties, go in Western European countries beyond the 20%, and they would actually be part of the ruling and the coalition groups, don't you think that they will try to now also infringe upon the rights of minorities that are within the state? And that would then maybe be something new about populism today. And I also have a question for Professor Herlin-Karnell. The Dublin regulation always baffled me because I've also seen how solidarity is so central in all the documents of the European Union and how it always refers to the principles of solidarity. So how did people ever agree and propose something like the Dublin regulation? Is it where the people actually propose regulation and vote upon it, not spoken of? It is something that they just kind of, that's in the legislation and that the court deals with, that it's not with those legislative powers?
I'm going to take another question. Riyad?
Yeah, two questions for all of you. Thank you very much. I'm trying to be articulate here about the relationship between populism and solidarity, and I think that the missing word is somewhat authenticity or something like that. Because solidarity cannot stand on its own. You need to be in solidarity with people with whom you feel some kind of connection. And isn't populism a cry against the democratic nature of solidarity standing now in the European Union? That's my question. Basically, a cry of the masses against something that is spoken, the language of solidarity, but something that is not felt. There is something within, I don't know, it's very hard for me to articulate what I'm thinking, but the question of authenticity within solidarity. How can you make solidarity authentic? And populism is going back to something very authentic, something homogeneous, much more homogeneous than what is now.
Maybe follow up?
Yeah, sure. You have. We're collecting our questions and you.
First of all, thank you for these three fantastic presentations. And I want to follow up Riyad and start with solidarity. Basically, solidarity is something that is individual. How much you care about the other, and how much you are not egoistic, but you are willing to do for the other. And this can be reflected by rules, of course, by social justice, and by action outside of rules. We aid Greece or not. the other, okay, how much you care about the other depends who is the other. And when we talk about kibbutz or small community, the chances that you care about the other are much higher. We are facing, the EU, and not only the EU, globalization. And we are now required to care to the other who is very, very remote other. And this is much more difficult. And maybe this is the connection between solidarity and populism. And, you said that you live in Switzerland because of that.
Or not just, I like the mountains, I like the place.
Yeah,
I don't have that.
In a sense, Switzerland is the example of the optimal size of kind of a community in which you can still care about the other, and you are much less affected by the outside world. There is immigration in Switzerland, and there are of course more affected. But to this degree, we managed to keep a kind of an equilibrium which does not characterize the EU as a whole or the global world.
Do you think that in Israel, which is a small country, we all care for each other very much? And we have a long story between the different communities because it's small?
To a sense, yes. Yeah. You go to Rambam Hospital, you see some notions of old solidarity, which are kind of a consequence of the size of this planet.
That's selection bias. So there is some people attracted to work in the hospital.
All right. May I also add a question to the mix? My question is for the three of you about political agency. So you, especially Annabel and you analyze structural dimensions, and the question whether there is space here to think about political agency that could do something or direct us to certain direction and not other. And specifically, because you mentioned the capitalists that broke the compact, like they did it because they had the agency to do that, they had the power and capacity to do that. And the question is the alternative political agency could change that direction. Of course, I don't know if the concept of political agency is a bit alien maybe, but whether there is something to do with this idea there. And Esther, to use, I think where the question of agency comes in is whether you think that policymakers in Brussels could nevertheless do something more or understand the challenge and do something more about these issues of immigration and security policies, sharing the burdens, advancing in any way, or are they doomed to continue? Good, we have many questions now and not so much time to answer, so Tal, you're going to be the very last comment or question.
A note about populism and solidarity. People who study the way the European Union institution work know how little solidarity there was all along. There is a false image in the public and also among learned people of the European project being idealistic or have warm heart feeling to each other. No way. This has been a tough bargain all along. Nobody's been giving gifts to nobody. Everybody was doing what they could to get the grabs on what they needed for their own country or their own sector. And they ceded powers to institutions, yelling and screaming, only confronting the abyss. This has been a very powerful structural force. So solidarity was a slogan, in my view. It was never really there. And that is why, in the end, I do not expect populist parties reaching power centers to be very different than what we've seen. They'll enter the same game of bargaining. They will be as selfish as the mainstream parties were before them. They will simply represent maybe different people and look for different things, but they will be in the same, and I'm saying this because we've already seen how this Marine Le Pen idea that they will go out of the euro blew out when she realized the old folks that the Brexit vote relied on weren't willing to endanger their pensions with this risky thing. There's an end to everything. The populists in Europe like free movement for Europeans in Europe. They're relaxed about it and they like it. They don't want to be restricted in their own free movement. They just don't want the outsiders to do free movement. You see Brexit. It's like a simple idea. When you try it, it's not clear at all how this can be done. So these things, as experience accumulates about trying to promote populist programs, the limits of the populists are very, very overt, very clear to simple people too. So that's what I'm saying, Canetti.
So each of you has, I don't know, 2-3 minutes, or take the time to respond. You can start.
I have very few things to say. Authentic solidarity. It depends if you mean at an individual level, and also referring to what you said, or as a political level, a national level. It's two very different things. We can help one country, but between ourselves, we don't manage together. If we take the example of the hospital, so it's very individual, and we feel connected to people. But then if we have to help another country in giving them money or taking their refugees or whatever, it's a totally different approach. So I don't know what you mean exactly by authentic, and I understand that the word was not your best word and you didn't know how to say. But what I understand from your question is that there's a feeling that it never fits exactly what we're expecting and what we would like to. So so I don't know. I don't know how you want to say something.
Yes. Let me be a little more again. Maybe imagine communities of Benedictines.
Yeah.
We may not be part of the same small group like in kibbutz. I, by the way, live in a kibbutz and nobody really cares about it.
That's the new kibbutz.
The only was even worse. There should be some kind of a root reason to care for each other. It can be religion, and Professor Joppke wrote about Christian Europe as the model for which I teach, so I love it. Or some kind of ethnicity, which is in the bottom of solidarity, but there is nothing like that among different European communities.
Okay, so if I won't be long because the other ones, my colleagues have lots of things to say. So just actually, I think that what you're talking about is a common story. If you take Anderson, it's a common story, and I think that there's clearly a problem with the story in Europe and in general in globalization. So that's true, but I will keep the word story and not and just another very, very shortly to your question about agency. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I think that we have this like Green New Deal or this kind of new, very new movements. That there are so new that we don't know exactly where they are going. So maybe they are kind of possible agency, a new kind of agency that wouldn't be that populist and more. But I don't know. So and just a word to you, Tal. I hope that you're right. Very much so.
On the solidarity thing, I think looking for a solution to a trouble will not involve Europe. Primarily, it will have to involve the member states, and it will have to be tackling the high disparity, the gap that is increasingly squeezing the middle class. And who has understood that? Thomas Piketty. He came up with a new manifesto for Europe. And this is a very clever idea still to build new supranational institutions, but with a heavy involvement of national parliamentarians. But the bottom line of the story is, no, of course, the Germans will not bail out the wasteful Greeks. New taxes are to be instituted, which will tax the obvious scoundrels, the beneficiaries of what has been happening in the past quarter century. The wealth has to be taxed. The progressive income taxes again have to be rejuvenated. And all what is being distributed, it's complex, and I haven't really got the detail of it. I actually got aware of it only in the newspaper, which I've been reading when I was traveling here. The rub of the matter is the redistribution that will happen through this indeed new supranational kind of parliament, quasi-European parliament, will be from Germany to Germany, but from the upper part to the lower part, and so on with the other pillars of the European structure. So it's an immensely realistic account, which in a way lives up to David Goodhart's notion there is a progressive dilemma. Either you have a lot of diversity, or you have a lot of solidarity. You cannot have both of the things together. And I think Piketty understood it, and he's kind of a radical leftist, so that's proof that there's not much more agency that one can hope for in this matter. And the question about populism and immigration policy. Most restrictions are not going back to family restrictions, asylum restrictions, the introduction of these citizenship tests, the notion of earned citizenship, all of that is older than the populists. Of course, they turn their screw a bit higher, but they don't bring a different quality into the game. The moment where a different quality might have come into the game was, we have to look to Trump's America. We have to look at what the Donald is doing with respect to immigration. What he's mostly doing is just exhausting possibilities, legislative possibilities that have been created by the Clinton administration in the mid-1990s, actually. Very draconian deportation possibilities and other restrictive possibilities. Already Obama was using it. Obama deserves the title of the chief deporter, and he was not even so unproud of it, because it also helped him to get votes in that quarter. That Donald, he had the instinct to institute a Muslim ban. And we know that it came to the Supreme Court. If the Muslim ban would have gone through under the notion, indeed, Muslims have to be kept out, then you would have had a qualitative change of immigration policy, an openly discriminatory policy. The Supreme Court ducked. The Supreme Court in this decision, Hawaii versus Trump, they simply argued, it is not a Muslim, it's a travel ban. It's a travel ban. And then they come up with all sorts of details concocted by the Sherpas of the Donald, why indeed it is not a grosso modo a Muslim, but just a travel ban. That means the principle of non-discrimination remains in place, even under the Donald.
You have the final words.
Thanks a lot for great questions, and also very interesting to listen to the other speakers. So I totally agree with you two on solidarity. And it's a very soft concept. It's very difficult to enforce it. It's a bit like the discussion on democracy in the European Union, and you have democracy beyond the nation state, we say, but this is like solidarity beyond the nation state. It's very difficult to make people love it, or like we spoke earlier about the notion of we the people, and that's what we're missing in the European Union. I mean, that's what they tried to introduce with the Constitutional Treaty in 2005, with a lot of symbols, and everybody should love the EU, but then France and the Netherlands voted against that treaty, and then with the Lisbon Treaty, it's almost the same package, but they repacked it, and it's more flexibility, and member states can opt in and opt out, and etc., etc. So without any enforcement mechanism of enforcing this is solidarity, and how could that be done? I mean, it's an open, like, should it even be done? Is it more like something for the Court of Justice or something for national courts to have in mind when they interpret European law? So it's very, very, very interesting issue. And then a question about the Dublin III regulation. I also don't understand the rationale, but it was adopted in 2013 before the crisis. And I think it was basically a management measure, like the work entered the European Union, and because then it's Schengen, you can travel wherever. So, and then the question of solidarity is then when member states don't want to help out. But then, and I said earlier about the quotation system as a measure of solidarity, because I should add that that's also been very criticized by people who say that actually it's not good for migrants or for asylum seekers to be quoted to a specific, like to be put in a specific state, because maybe they will integrate better in the state that they prefer to to seek asylum. So that's like it's an ongoing question whether like how it should look, and it's very interesting. And then one of your other question was how is EU law adopted? If I like, because usually the Commission proposes legislation and then it's adopted in the European Parliament and the Council. I think that's also the case in 2013 because that was after the Lisbon Treaty was adopted in 2009. So it's very interesting, very ongoing discussion. And then I had one question for you. Sorry, I almost forgot. Sorry. The political agency institutions are doomed to fail. Yeah, on this particular. I think again the issue is enforcement and also the politics of it, like because now the EU is worried that maybe they will end up with more Brexit or more Poland and Hungary scenarios or more. So it's really, I'm a lawyer, but I would say this is it's very political how far the EU dares to go and push the member state. But of course they can always have infringement procedures, and the Court of Justice could also be a leader in this regard. And that's also the democratic perspective. Is it democratic that the Court of Justice would legislate when the member states don't agree on the policies? It's a very dynamic or very complicated discussion. But as a human rights lawyer, I would say yes, they should do something. The institutions in general.
All right. Thank you very much. You're welcome to join us at the coffee break, and then later to the second panel on the politics of solidarity. We finish with politics. We're going to start with politics again. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think it's somebody else. And I'm happy that I got your picture. I mean, I read it. Ayelet.
So many years ago.
So I was there. So Germany and Israel, the so I was teaching a course on Israel. Yes, head now and now, John. Yes,
She wrote a book with David Leighton about discrimination against Muslims in
Yes,
Europe.
yes. She was a lot of Palestinian things. So I was really curious about
This is a great place to be.
yeah, border system.
Yeah.
So
Amazing year.
a year, even more. We're there for almost a year and a half. Scholarship for postdoc, because Israel so they fund, among others, Israeli PhD graduates campuses in the US and Europe. So that's great. They have scholars coming in and out in Mexico for months. No. Funded by the university, and then most scholars come there. They have their own projects. No, we don't. Yeah, most don't. But the seminars are organized in 51, which is great. The collaboration is great. When was this? You know what? We went to a center for deportees in Japan, right on the first one. And she said that gets all the talk, the rhetoric, and the negative, the numbers that claim the head of this refugee center has not gone up. So perhaps more teachers are stuck. Perhaps in Western America, not they were anyway, so Drake was with the founder. I also read about this deportator in chief. And I read that he was actually very high in numbers in terms of sending back people just as people with criminal records. Actually, the numbers were lower than the Bush administration, etc. Many years in the US, like 20 years, those are lower numbers. So, exactly. And the criminals. Yes, exactly. The Daksa-Halabi. Yeah, no, very interesting.
All right.
It's by the way, very interesting. 2016, we were great documentary available online with degrees. And it was I watched undocumented Mexican Americans by Australia. And maybe there's another word for it, beyond borders. Beyond borders, undocumented Mexican Americans. Mail on YouTube. Very interesting.
All right.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
What was it?
Adi. Adi. Yes. Nice to meet you. Yeah, but she's helping me out. Would you maybe like to do coffee?
Yes, indeed. Not coffee, but it will be beer, right?
Why not?
Very nice to meet you. I read lots of this stuff, and it was quite amazing to hear your current emphasis on the economy, because I read The Veil and Christian Democracy and European
Nice to meet you. You all know each other, yes.
So if I just tell you what I thought introduce you or actually, you know, very local and we are very much on the board. So that's an interesting approach of actually approaching populists one way state, that is capacity you're the people who actually create you're the people as practical as down to bring that level at the end, but you will start very low. I'm very happy to have you have this combination because you can go switches to each other. I want you to be local as well as I said. I'm into rich to Europe at the end.
يسوي الحال.
Let's keep in mind that we also want an answer to what the answer on the face populism
Again?
Mama, بلاش لا من هذا الحسنة سنة عشرة يا تعال I carried I spoke there. Yeah. I spoke I've been there. You know that our class with yeah,
סך הכל, יודעים ש13, אם הייתי
אנחנו 20,000 ב-13,000 עובדים, אבל כמה עובדים
עובדי המדינה יש להגיד סך הכל זה
Thank you very much, first of all, for the first panel. I think it was a really interesting insight. We have very different approaches to our topic. When Katharina and Ayelet actually came to me and asked me whether I wanted to be a chair for the second panel, I really liked the idea of how they organized this conference by putting the more theoretical approach at the beginning and having a very practical approach on the second panel. And I think when I saw the names, it couldn't be more on the ground than the panelists that we have now here. I will shortly introduce them, and I'm sure there will be much more to tell about them. So on my right is Suheir Daksa-Halabi. She's since November 2013 the shelter director at WADO for Arab women and children victims of violence. She has a very long story as a social worker, and I hope she will share a little bit of that. Her background is social work at the University of Iowa, where she also did her MA in clinical social works, and I hope she will share a little bit more of her research and also the practical work that she does. On her right is Boaz from the Histadrut, the General Federation of Labor in Israel, and the Union Secretary of the Social Workers Association. I think that's an interesting combination that we have here. Most of you will know about the struggles that social workers face at the moment in Israel, and I hope we'll have a little discussion about that as well. Also about Boaz, I could say a lot more things. He's been involved in a lot of political movements in Haifa. He's been part of the Haifa Bay Area Association, right? And you have been a former Haifa City Council. A lot of topics that we can talk here as well. Dr. Vatury, from a lecturer also at Haifa University and co-general secretary of Koch Laudim. So one of Israel's big labor union organizations. These three perspectives will bring a very local and a very on-the-ground idea of what we're actually talking about. And I think this is how we probably have to approach populism. A big idea of populism that we always hear is you're talking there in the capital cities, you're talking their elite. We have people on the ground and we want to hear their answers to these populists as well, and I hope this will be possible. I think it's a novum here at the Haifa Center for German and European Studies that we have people, all of them are from Haifa actually, if I'm not mistaken, or from northern Israel at least. So we have people from all over the world. Now it will be very local. I think that's a big chance also with this topic. So welcome, three of you. So may I ask you to start with a little statement?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, thank you for having me here. So, Suheir, I'm a social worker since 2004, and I also were the first Palestinian Arab Israeli woman to be elected for the Social Work Union as a candidate in the secretariat also of the union, and it was very important job that I did, volunteered in. So I think social work mainly, it's a way of living, it's a very it's a political work because we also deal with the outcome of political choices or decisions that this government or the other has, and we have to deal with the implements of this decisions on the ground. So I work with many communities, starting with the prisoners in the prison department, also with the abusers, domestic violence abusers, and also with the victims, and also in the hospital. So I had a range of jobs, and that really reflects the way that social workers deal in Israel, also worldwide. It's a 24/7 job that never ends and really deals with discriminated people and people that are on the parts of the society that they bear the major consequences of everything that happens that in their daily life. For me, it's a very political work, and it started to take this turn for me in 2011 as the social movement started here in Israel. According also with what's happening in the area, in the region, in the Arab world, and it also started with our social worker struggle for to better and to improve our situation and work conditions, and also to better our communities that we deal with their situation, their conditions of living. So it's still ongoing, and they would never end. And I think we never can resolve or take to end up with a resolution under this economic system. And all the solutions that we have so far are also like it's Panadol pills for a cancer, because we deal in a very systematic discrimination within every sphere of our lives. We can see that also in Israel, and that I had so many studies also in researches that I've been a member in, that point out that even in this is the systematic discriminations implemented also, whenever you have like a colored budget for, like we say, the handicapped community, you also see a discrimination and the dispute of that money, of that budget, even that is not acceptable by law. So this will be, I think I will have more time and more things to tell when I will be open for questions. That's so far. And yeah, we'll talk about my work as also as a director of a shelter for battered women, where there are almost 20 women killed annually in Israel, and only like 2% of that murders are coming into justice. So we will also address that matter, and I will elaborate on that more during the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. I thought about what to speak, because as you can say, one part of me is being the citizen of Haifa, and you cannot be a citizen of Haifa. Was born in Haifa, and his family was born in Haifa, without thinking about solidarity in each and every step that you make in the city. On the other hand, I right now work in the General Federation of Labor in Israel, Histadrut, and I started to work there 2.5 years after a long time of volunteering in labor unions. And when I just arrived to Histadrut, to my current job, so I had to face a union that was, I think that 1 month after I came to the union, the chair told me, okay, that you know that right now we're going to elections in the Histadrut, and 4 months after we're going to election in our union, and everything changed. Like when you have election in the Histadrut, so you see everything that you ask yourself all the time: is this a labor movement or is this an election, like a political election? That it's not like what you think and suppose that you do. And afterwards, when we have the election in the union itself, I found myself as a union secretary facing a challenge because the political candidates spoke about solidarity and the role of the social worker union in the social workers' future and the social movements future in Israel itself. And the more I say, the more socialist, the more radical candidate has won. And then I found myself with a different management, a different union that I can. And I think that my conclusion for that is that sometimes you have the power to be in solidarity with. Sometimes you don't have the power, and you need others to be solidarity with you. And this is about the strong and the weak. And I think that when you want to promote social solidarity, you have to remember that always, when you want more social solidarity, you need to find the ways how the one who is stronger has will be more solidarity with the one who is weaker. And it's not like the one who is stronger has more money, the one who is weaker has less money. So it's not just that. That if I'm right now working in the union that can promote workers who are work in a privatized companies and they have less bargaining power, let's say not less, they don't have any bargaining power, okay? They don't have any collective agreements, they have nothing from that. And I am as a union can be representative for them, okay? Or let's say court didn't say till now that I'm not representative for them, so I'm representative for them. So I have to put a lot of effort to bring the to be with the workers who are unionized, very solidarity with them, because in a whole we are a sector, and in a whole we are a system that can work together, and in a whole we will gain more. All of us will gain more from being together, not being split apart, because one of the things that happened to the social workers is that they were split apart on the years when another percentage of them were privatized. Right? Another companies, another mini sectors, and till now that half of the social workers are privatized and half work in the public sector. 20 years ago, all of them were part of the public sector. So this is my vision about social solidarity. Okay, it's about power. Okay, if you have the power to be solidarity, you have to do it. And I know that most people don't think about solidarity when they wake up in the morning or go to bed in the evening, but I think it's one of our goals. And I must say that being live in Haifa is making it more easier. One of our goals is to convince people and organizations and the movement who has the power to put solidarity in the first priority and not in the list. That's from now.
So unlike my colleagues, which are both of my personal friends of mine and are from the Histadrut, I'm from Dim, which is left, to the left of the Histadrut. We are a socialist, democratic, Jewish Arab trade union. That's the way we perceive ourselves. That's the way that we see ourselves. Representing about 30,000 employees nowadays. And our members are basically from all segments of the Israeli working class, be it Palestinians from East Jerusalem, the Galilee, mainly bus drivers. About a quarter of all the bus drivers in Israel are organized within Koch-Dim. Nursery workers, mainly from ultra-Orthodox families, from Arab families, from what we call Mizrahim in Israel. Say Oriental, but it would be more right to say Mizrahim. And we also have strong academic union within Koch-Dim. We organize all the public colleges in Israel right now. Also the junior staff in the Memoriam University and all the teaching staff in the Open University. So we are a diverse trade union. And we would like to see ourselves, and I think we can say it quite proudly, that we are a fighting trade union. About 1/6 of all the strike days in Israel last year are because of us. And the history is bigger than us. And of course, we have people in the Histadrut which we see us very similar to us. For example, the head of the social workers, which could easily be part of Koch-Dim leadership. At least with their view, of course, is very well to the Histadrut. And
easily,
yes. And we're also find it good to cooperate with those parts of the Histadrut. On the other hand, we have our criticism of a large share of the bureaucratic structure of the Histadrut, the lack of internal democracy in the Histadrut, and to a degree about the history of the Histadrut, which of course cannot be changed, but it's a heavy burden to carry, especially here about 300 meters from where the cement strike was broken by the Histadrut in 1951. For anybody who doesn't remember and doesn't know the story. They wanted to keep their own trade union, and it was not accepted at that time by Ben-Gurion and Albogi and Abahushi and all the famous figures of Haifa, which I think about half the university and the surrounding area is called upon them. And as the right trade union, also many of the founders of Koch-Dim came from Haifa. One of our most famous struggles was here in 2011, the same year of the social protest, talking about the strike in Haifa Chemicals for 6 months. A strike which couldn't have held without the solidarity and help of the social process of Haifa, which was very different from Tel Aviv. It was much more socialist, much more aware of the contact between trade unions and social protest. And again, in 2017 and 2018, a much more tragic struggle. I would say something that is really frustrating when we had to deal with the closing of Haifa Chemicals because of the closing of the ammonia tank in the bay, which is perhaps very good for the environment, but not so good for the workers, and nobody cared about the workers when they closed the factory, of course, last thing, and we had to deal with it. We still have to deal with it. I'm supposed to go to a negotiation about the compensation and so forth. So, time, how to be successful. So this is the reality in which we are working. And I think that in Israel you have a very vivid left, and a down-to-earth left, socialist left. Like I said, all the segments of the working class, it has no representation in parliament. It's not connected to parliament. I have very little to say about the Labour Party or about merits. And what I have to say, maybe I have to keep to myself. And it's because those are either a party with a very complex past, talking about the Labour Party, which now is trying to find its way after the big political success in the last election, or with the case of Meretz, a party which still have to decide whether it's a liberal party, which approves mainly the elite in the big cities, or Tel Aviv, in the common in Haifa, or a socialist party. They still haven't decided between those two options, and they're not really big enough parties to be both things. You know, it's not like the American Democrats, which are very large and can have at the same time a progressive stream and liberal stream, which can find some common ground, and at the same time have very different views with regard to economics. Those are parties which were engulfed by a new center party with a very clear ideology of no to Netanyahu, about, of course, blue and white, blue humor in the center. So in that way, we are syndicalist. Meaning there is a left, there is a struggle, there is something which is perhaps every populist dream, and it has no contact whatsoever to the parliament. I think I will leave more to
Thank you very much. Can you hear me like that? That's fine. Yeah, at least to me, there's a lot of questions coming up to your statements. Thank you very much. I want to build a little bit the bridge to Europe, where we have more in the first panel, but I think it's important to have it here as well, from the local level to Europe. And both of you, Boaz and Ami, you've been involved in the social movement 2011. You've been also so my question would be like, you say, especially the Haifa movement was very special. Is this something that you would, if you approach Europeans that face similar struggles, is this something that they can learn, maybe also of the failures that you had?
I'll begin with saying that the Karlheinz originally look for learning from, okay, perhaps
there's no microphone. So what is it?
It's not working. Okay, so I'll just raise my voice.
Yeah.
So I will say that Karlheinz originally sought to learn from Scandinavia. The reason with the structure of the Scandinavian trade union, this with regard to internal democracy, but we work in a very, very different environment. Unlike Scandinavia, we are 30,000, there are 3.5 million members of the trade union. It's a small difference. There is also the difference in the legal system. In Israel, the right to strike is very limited. Every strike will be taken to the court. Meaning the court can decide to stop almost any strike. We have almost half of the freedom, I will not say all of the freedoms that trade unions have in Scandinavia. We're not lacking all of them, but we're lacking most of them. Israel, with regard to the right to strike, is somewhere between Turkey and Spain, I would say, comparatively. Could be worse, but not the best. And so it's a very different climate. I was just talking here, for example, that Scandinavian trade unions can get by with about 30 lawyers for all the trade unions, where we in Karlheinz alone need 6-7 lawyers just for 30,000 workers and working full-time job. All those legal problems. But on the other hand, we can also teach Europeans because, you know, when you work in harsh conditions, you become less, you take things less for granted. You understand that you are part of the struggle and you don't accept, you don't expect, I would say, that the other side will cooperate with you. The basic idea is that we are in a struggle and perhaps we will win it and perhaps not, but if I'm looking for partners, then I will look to a partner, for example, in the social worker union or in other grassroots. I would not, for example, be extremely optimistic about round table with a government that thinks about destroying all what remains of the right to strike in Israel, and or with a government that legalized a law like the nation law, which by the way Karlheinz condemned. Didn't decide to do that, but Balkan of course did. This is part of the situation that we work in, and the process in 2011 in Israel was something which, at least with regard to the scale, had nothing similar to it in Western Europe. It had something similar to that in Southern Europe, in Spain, in Greece, perhaps also in Turkey, which is not exactly in Israel, or came later. But it was, for a minute, it seemed like a revolution is possible. But it was hijacked very quickly by people from the mainstream, which were pushed to the center of the arena by the media and other forces. But especially in Haifa, it looked like something totally new. I mean, it was not Stav Shafir, it's Shmuley and all the figures. It was figures here from Haifa, which were aware of the fact that the social protest is both Arab and Jewish, which were aware of the importance of contact between trade unions and the social protest. I would have to say, to be honest, that there were also struggles between Anwar Olet which were connected to the Histadrut and Karlheinz activists, but it didn't came to Viking, it was just, a more polite feuds, but at least it was there. It was something very, very, very alive. And I think many people from the Haifa protest are very frustrated with the way in which the protest was hijacked, from our point of view, by the mainstream, which wanted to talk about consumerism, while we wanted to talk about socialism.
Yeah.
I think that social movements has a goal, and the goal is to inspire, not to make a revolution. Because what I remember from 2011 was that I was part of the socialist wing in this movement, but the movement itself, the way the movement react and the way we act in demonstrations and from day to day was much more strong, my point of view, to make a change afterwards. Because I don't think that the problems that the social movement spoke about, injustice and housing, and I think it was at the least like 100 things. And I don't think that social movements could solve them in 2 months, but I think that what it did, it inspired a generation. in those years, this year especially, needed to decide which political side will he take, how he deal with what is his opinion about the power in Israel, who holds the power and who doesn't hold the power. And I think social movements need to be inspired. And in this point, I think the social movement in 2011 was very successful. But when social movements doesn't meet organized groups, in the end, the government is stronger. Okay, and the government here was stronger because after 1.5 months, it's practically killed the social movements by telling them you are not focused. We will have a committee of 20 specialists in killing movements, and it's end. But the groups who gained a lot of power from this movement was the organized groups, because after the 2011 they had more volunteers talking about socialism. Before 2011, no one talked about it, not in the economic newspaper, nothing. And right now, even the market newspaper is speaking about his language is about regulation and stuff, but before 2011, you cannot find one journalist who will not speak that privatization is the main goal and purpose for people to wake up in the morning. And I think that organized groups and organized unions need these movements, need this inspiration for having more power for them, because we need to be inspired in order to bring hope and bring change. And I think that people right now, when they remember 2011, if they were part of it, they still saying to themselves that it was a very, very short period, as I said, of hope. And hope is necessary to bring change. And it's very, very, when I say that right now, I keep reminding myself that right now in Israel we need a lot of hope in order to bring the change that I believe that we can bring.
Okay, I'll add a bit over that. My memory of it, it was spectacular by how it was able to connect also to the regional changing and movements happening around. And at that time, many workers' strikes were taking places. Also, like in the Haifa chemicals, social workers like me, before me getting into the union, I was a social worker. So we were very active. We pushed and we pressured our other social workers to come and to take in solidarity actions with Haifa chemicals in the factories. We went in with our cars and we supported the strike, and also the nurses and other sectors. But and a magnificent thing was that holding the discussions daily, and also in the weekends, in that parts, in the camps, in the cities. And in Haifa, let's not forget that the main Arab citizens in Israel live in the north, and most of them are recognized with Hadash, with the Communist Party. So they were more active in Haifa and up north in Nazareth. Although in Nazareth there was some camps for a moment there, and then, but this movement failed to make a formation of a political and organized workers' party, and that was, and there was a vacuum people like after the populism of like Shakir and Intikshmoni going to Abuda as if they are the representative of us, of the masses, and that was also opportunism in my opinion. So, but it failed. I think like as Palestinians, most of the Palestinians, which are 20% of the population in Israel, they are citizens of Israel, alienated themselves or were alienated from this mass movement. Like really short percentage of us were involved. I was really active in that. I also like had a speech at that demonstration in Haifa. But most of Arab people were not in that mass movement. And I think if we by then understood how to bring the Arab street also into that movement, I think things would look different now, and we failed to do that. And I think that would be a very good lesson for Europe to take into account. And but it really gave us hope. It's the first time that I had a feeling of power, that I can make some changes. I can. I have something in my hand that I can do. And of course, don't. I will remind you, it was like killed because there was a strike on Gaza. There was this a terror attack in the southern in Israel, and then they attacked Gaza. And there goes the mass movement in Israel. This is how you kill every mass movement, by the siege consciousness. You focus on that. And of course, you build these committees to come and to kill the fire of it. You say, okay, this we will discuss that. Of course, after many years, they had a formation of this paper that they submitted to the government, talking about what budgets should be allocated into the welfare department, into the Ministry of Health, and etc., etc. And nothing, of course, moved on. So I think that also there are another sentence that was really is there in one of the demonstrations in Tel Aviv. People started to raise a slogan called "Arifu Pegati." How do you call it in English?
Mutual responsibility. Mutual responsibility.
Yeah, but it was like focused on how you bring into this movement like people, settlers, and also like people from the south, and they really like alienated Arabs from that movement as well. It was like on the basis of the ethnicity, religion, and yes, and I think this is why it didn't really hit the target. It didn't. It started by voicing the needs of the masses, but it failed to do that. But I will point, I think, a point that you brought up, both of you. In organized workplaces, Arabs and Jews did join the struggle. But still, in Israel, we don't have much of that joint workplaces for Arabs and Jews. This is why it's very important that one of the first lessons to understand from that, it's very important for workers to be unionized, to be organized. There is the power for us. And yes, I don't agree with the trade union or with the Histadrut, but we fought in it. This is how Atidenu, and this is how Embal Hermoni became the head of the social worker union. We fought the system from the inside. And this is why I know that we have the power. And we should not give up. But it's really hard on a daily life basis here in Israel, because now it's not very trendy for you to be a left. And you cannot voice, you cannot put forward socialist demands and be a right winger. You cannot do that. You do that for the short run, not for the long run. You will be exposed very soon. And that mass movement it really gave us hope, and people so that they have power if they do organize. And this is what we lack of organization.
And maybe also a lack of solidarity. I can see that.
Yeah.
I want to open to questions, a lot of questions I could. Let's start on the left. Yeah. You want to start? Maybe I didn't know.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's very, very interesting. I have a question on, if you like, the limits of solidarity, maybe connecting a bit to Europe that was just mentioned, and in a way a bit criticizing. I think your work is super important, and we need the work to be done. But what I see, from my point of view, focusing on migration issues, is that your work is very much citizenship-based, the work here in Israel, and not labor force-based. And I'll say what I mean. Just to give some examples, you guys were saying, Boaz were saying solidarity with the ones who are the weakest, for example. And you said all segments of the working class. And Suheir, you said important that workers are unionized. But there is a large group that we're not talking about, that you guys did not mention, that are completely neglected, transparent, not part of the labor movement. And this is the group of labor migrants, asylum seekers. We're talking about 3% of the Israeli population that is not part of this. And we watch the media, we see what's going on in the construction sector, which is deadly, with workers, many of them labor migrants, dying almost weekly because of terrible conditions. You mentioned Scandinavia. Take an example. We used to live in Denmark some years ago. We lived there for 5 years, and as migrants there, we were automatically part of the labor union that was relevant to our workplace. It didn't matter that we were not citizens, that we came temporarily. Really ask, where is this? Where is this group? You see the Filipinos in the domestic care sector, agriculture, Thailand, they're not there. So kind of contradictive in a way. You're reinforcing the nation state here. So you're talking about Arabs and Jews, super important, but we're forgetting others. Thank you.
I can talk only about Karlheinz, not about the Histadrut, but I would say that a large share of Karlheinz members, Palestinian from East Jerusalem, they are not citizens. They are part of the union. They're part of the union leadership. They are not citizens of Israel. They are not allowed to vote for the Knesset. They are allowed to vote for me and to vote for others and to be part of the leadership and to also bolster me. They think that I'm not doing my job well enough. And with regard to migrant workers in Israel, in Karlheinz, we did make effort to bring them into the union. It was extremely problematic because of the legal system. To begin with, many of them are afraid to organize because they think that if they join the union, they will lose the work permit and the right to stay in Israel. And we did an effort to do it with the agricultural workers, together with Karlheinz, which is an Israeli NGO, and they were just too scared. We came there to the areas, those Moshavim, and they were simply too scared. And we tried to do it with the Filipinos, but then we had another problem because in a very, very cynic way, the employers of the Filipinos are those poor old people that are in need of those services and not the government or social agencies. So you have like 20,000 employers and employers which you don't really want to fight with. What do I have to say against an old man, 85 years old, which is officially the employer of this Filipino? Although, of course, he is not the one to blame. It's the system which created this situation. And we try to find a solution. It was, again, the problem of being afraid to strike, being afraid to be known as part of the union. Like people were joined, but then say, don't say that we are part of the union, that we joined the union. And in many ways, the situation of migrant labor in Israel is similar to the Bay countries. It's not like in Europe, meaning And the migrant workers in Israel don't have a permanent staying permit in Israel. They don't have the status of an inhabitant of Israel, which is almost normal in Europe. It's
Like in Lebanon,
yeah, it's like in Lebanon or in the Gulf countries. Like they're slavery actually. It's not, and it's very organized. It's very hard to organize slaves. I admit, and this is the situation. But we make our effort.
Should it matter if they're documented or not, and whether many are documented?
It's not, and when there was the call to push out the undocumented, Koach Lavdim protested against it. At least it didn't.
I may open to some more questions, even though. Can I collect some questions and you just tell me who you want to address them?
Thank you for the presentation and for joining us. So the previous panel was more academic, but there was this idea mentioned or highlighted that in the European context about the issue of growing social inequalities and what that means for actually for democracy. And Israel, in a way, is an extreme case in comparison to EU members. If you look at the OECD data, they're one of the unequal countries in the distribution of income and wealth. The question is, do you think that the trade unions can still be a political agency or political organization to change that or to improve that situation? That you think that would be sort of a natural act, right? Like to struggle for more or for less social inequality? Or is this thought it's just some kind of a romantic idea of past when labor movements were powerful? And my second question in this context, do you cooperate with trade unions elsewhere? Is it helpful? Is it productive? If you can say anything about that.
Maybe two more questions.
I have a lot to say, but I know we should consider the question. But first of all, guys, come on. I feel here really I have to defend a little bit the Israeli trade unions and also the Histadrut. For example, your remark, how do you know that, why do you say that they are neglected, that no one takes care, that they cannot be part of the trade unions, cannot represent?
In practice, they're not.
This is simply not true. Since 2010, every migrant worker in Israel, legal or not legal, can join the Histadrut, is represented by the Histadrut. I mean, it's clear that it's not the ideal situation, but it's happening. Before that, it was not the case. And it was, you know what the change made? Joining Israel, the OECD, because OECD said in 2010, this is one of our conditions, because in the whole world, it is exactly like your experience in Denmark. So this is number one. Same thing about Palestinian workers, non-Israeli Palestinian workers from the West Bank, for example. Yeah? They are indirectly, they are represented by the Histadrut in coordination with the Palestinian Trade Union Organization. I mean, there are a lot of problems, but this is still simply not true. This is one thing I have to say. The second thing, if I may, to the social protest movement and so on. Here again, I personally believe, also from today's point of view, 2019, this was a huge success. The Israel social protest movement is a huge success story. Many people think the other way because what are the achievements, what has improved, and so on. So I give you a few examples. One example is that now in the public discourse since 2011, social and economic issues are part of the discourse. They have not been before that. This is number one. Number two. The trade unions are stronger. They're getting stronger. There is a very positive development in organizing, for example. And it is not only in Israel, also in other countries. So only people who say the times of trade unions are over, this is not true. I think I'm very optimistic regarding international trade union movement, also cooperation and all these issues, and also in Israel. And the third thing, I mean, we sit here is a representative of Karlheinz and of the Histadrut. I remember times when the members could sit together at one table, but I know that now, because it comes from the bottom, now there are the first corporations and they work together, which is very, very positive. I have a lot of other things, but I want also the other people to that. So I want a question. The question is, except to Annabel, because I know that also your PhD, you wrote on Scandinavia and Sweden also. It's a very simple question, and I want to also come back to Europe, because we discussed it also in the first session. Do you think, Ami, or other people who know Europe and Israel, do you know that that the European, let's say the Scandinavian or Swedish society, also the Sweden, is more solidaric than the Israeli society? And what is the reason? Is the Israeli society a solidaric society or not? And where are we going to? Yeah, thank you.
One more question. So, we are seeing a decline of social democracy, political social democracy, as in democracies in Europe especially. It's not clear whether there was social democracy in the United States ever, but at least in Europe, we really understand social democracy. Organized or political, that is parliamentary social democracy, is declining, and there are reasons for it. I think the Marxist school underlying that movement is still relevant today. Capital still concentrates. We have tech firms that come to dominate markets and societies in ways that the Rockefellers couldn't even dream of. And I think people are being made aware of it. But there are different mechanisms to reach people's consciousness today. The technology creates a situation where people most people no longer share a workspace on a daily basis with their compatriots. It was easier to organize in the days of Henry Ford because the people were there all the time, and that is important because you have a problem of coordination. In order for, we call this, I'm sure you're aware of it, the collective action problem. People, we have the larger the group is, the easier it is to defect, even if you agree with the goals, and to shirk. And the large groups have a problem of coordinating. It helps if they attend a hall where they see each other the whole day. That helps them. But nowadays, people use high-tech or information technology devices to work from remote places. They may work for a single employer, but they don't even meet. So it's very hard to organize the old way. What I'm saying is that while the ideas are still relevant, the methods of organizations have to change radically. And it's hard. It's not obvious how to do this, but it has to happen. One way to do this, and she mentioned migrants, but another important public is the gig economy. The big development in terms of workers and employers relations in the past decade or two is the development of the gig economy. The gig economy means all those people who do not have a formal job, but from their home do all kinds of temporary things, sometimes involving high skills. It's not necessarily manual laborers, but they're not organized. They sit in their homes and their employment or their income is precarious. These people could be organized. Now, how to reach? It's about changing the main divide in the politics. It's changing the way you put the two main forces. It used to be the organized left and right. Today, there's a need to bring the conscience back. Now, I completely sympathize with what you said about all these class struggles falling hostage to the Arab-Israeli conflict, to nationalism, to security. It dominates the news. There's been this nice experiment, how you doing? It comes and goes. There is a need to start what you want to do. there's a need to form a strong base for reporting and disseminating economic news. There's a broad audience for this. A lot of people care. It's just that they are consciously tuned into the security narrative. Their mind is always on this security thing. This is what the media reports all the time. And people are sort of brainwashed through security. I don't think security is an invention. I'm not saying the average Israeli company is fake. No, it's real. But there are other issues too, and we can talk about those other issues. And the more people are exposed to these news, to various tycoons, fighting tycoons is not a socialist thing exclusively. There are people who are liberal and say we are for competition and we are against tycoons. You find a very broad audience for this, but to begin with, you have to disseminate the news, to keep reporting, to keep banging on it, to put it prominent in people's internet websites, to put it prominent in media and, Galiholik and stuff. This is the way forward, the way I see it.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're running out of time. I'll leave it for these three questions for the moment. Maybe we'll start with Ayelet's questions. Where do you want to?
Can you, sorry, remind me with the question again, please?
What's the role of trade unions still as an actor, please selected to change or to better the unequal situation in Israel and other countries? And if you have experience with that.
I do believe so. For nowadays, I do believe so. I do agree with you that the world is changing. The forms of occupational system is also changing. We have to also address that and to have to deal with that as well. But yes, for the meantime, yes, it's a very important major agent, and this discrediting of the powerful organizations or unions. It's very obvious because it's very threatening for the others of the least gain. So yes, of course, it's very important for us to also to maintain or what accomplishment have we met so far. Thanks.
Boaz, do you want to come back to this question?
I have to repeat.
You can choose.
What was the question again?
Can you repeat your question?
Micky,
No, I asked how many.
We have time. Oh, yeah.
Okay. So, okay. So I would say that in what makes Scandinavia unique is actually the rate of organization of trade unionism. The fact that in Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and Finland, you have the highest rates of organized labor. And if you check income inequality of what's called disposable income together with public consumption, you will find a very, very strong connection between the rate of unionization and the equality, a very, very strong contact. And I think that maybe the Czech Republic and Slovenia, they are the odd cases of countries with weak trade unions, which are relatively equal. All the other countries, which are, let's say, in the 10 most equal countries in the world, there are countries with strong trade unions. In Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Belgium, and Holland, which has small unions but large work councils. And I think that in Israel, and also we did, like you said, succeed in something which is right now quite unique in the industrial world. Hope to spread. I understand that there is that trend also in Norway and Finland of more people being organized, not only in absolute terms but also in relative terms. In Israel, between 2012 and 2016, the rate of organized workers without counting the foreign workers grew from 24% to 26%. This is a net increase of about 70,000 workers, which is a lot. And also we saw in the last, since 2011, and this is 2011 was the year of the social process, we see an improvement in the Gini of the disposable income in Israel. And I think that the only explanation because the government is the same government and Benjamin Netanyahu didn't change his political view with regard to the economy, is the fact that he is more afraid after the social protest to do things which he was not afraid to do before 2011, and the fact that more people are organized and the minimum wage was raised thanks to the work of both Prof and the Histadrut, and all those changes, they still leave Israel a very unequal society, an extremely unequal society if we take into account also the West Bank, which is fully part of the Israeli economy. Then we are in levels like in South America, perhaps more than that, but still we see an improvement. And with regard to, he also asked about international contacts. Then, of course, the Histadrut has a very large department area, but also in Karlheinz, we have those contacts with Swedish trade unions, with Belgian trade unions, with the left-wing trade unions in Italy, like the CGIL, and with people that come from the American trade unions, which has to face the hardest challenges in the industrial world, and they come and give courses in Karlheinz. And we still don't have to work to give economy like in the States. Less developed in Israel. It's a large problem. And on the other hand, for example, in Denmark, Uber is not allowed to operate, for example. Many Scandinavian countries are strongly impatient on the gig economy. So I think that this is something that we have to do. For example, Exeter came to us and we talked about what will do if Uber will become leader in Israel, what we'll have to do. I think
there was one last question or statement. If I saw it right? No? Yes? No?
Just to link it up with European integration. So I don't know anything about trade unions. It's very interesting to listen to you, but has to link it back to the EU integration. There are some interesting cases in Sweden where the EU Court yesterday said that the labor unions in Sweden are not allowed to say this is like social dumping. Like someone comes and says, I do this work much cheaper than the Swedish.
They have to have a minimum level, and if the employer doesn't agree, then the unions are allowed to strike on this.
Yes, but and that's what the court said, that we finish free movement. So now,
but it is allowed in Swedish law, right?
Yeah, exactly. Still, and it's still valid Swedish legislation, or that depends on if you think
I think that now the EU even made it larger. It said that you're not allowed only, you are allowed to strike only on minimum terms, and now you will also be allowed to strike also about a more advanced working condition. And I think that the center party in Sweden right now said that it will block the legalization. The Social Democrat and the Communist wanted to have center party.
Thank you very much for updating that. I just wanted to highlight the free movement dimension. Anybody else?
Yeah, David, there was one more.
Thank you all panelists. I have two questions to Mrs. Daksa-Halabi, one comment to Dr. Vatury. You mentioned that Mrs. Halabi that annually 20 women are killed.
Yes, almost. Annually, 20 women are killed.
I think that this year, referring to 2018, we even witnessed this number in the rise.
Yes, yes.
My question is, out of this number, how many Arab women are killed?
Almost 60% of them.
60%?
Yeah.
And then something personally to you.
Yes.
You mentioned in your recent biography that currently you are director of the shelter.
True.
Previously, you were a director for domestic violence treatment.
Yeah.
In Haifa. Now, we in Israel mostly think about מקלט לנשים מוכות, זה shelter.
Yes.
Your shelter is specifically for our population, it's not integrated. All the shelters.
Okay, I can explain about it a bit.
Yes, and also what's the difference between the shelter and the domestic center, and whether it's only in Haifa.
All right, okay. So in Israel, there are 14 shelters for battered women and their children. In Hebrew, we say, "Nashim nefgaot alimut." There are victims of violence, not only victims, okay? Not only battered. So in Israel, there are 14 shelters. Due to the law of 1991, the shelter started as an idea of organization, feminist organization. They opened their houses for women to come in and to be sheltered from danger. And then by the law, launching the law, because also the work and the pressure that feminist organizations, both Israeli and Palestinian Israeli organization, pressured the government to launch the law of 1991 of preventing domestic violence. And this is how the country took responsibility and recognized the phenomena of the violence as a social phenomenon and not a private thing. And this is a very major fact in working and combating violence, domestic violence. So Israel, there are 14 shelters run by organizations. Still, it's a privatization. And the Ministry of Welfare, of course, give us the budgets and we run it. Two of them, of the 14, are aimed for Arab women in Israel. So there are few of the others that can accept Arab women and their children, but they lack an Arabic staff. And as you probably understand, it's not just giving a shelter, a place to lay your head and to be protected. It's also a therapeutic place. It's a very important station in the woman and child's life to rehabilitate, to examine well-being, to have the ability to be strengthened, and then to lead a very independent life. So this is our work. Yeah, we have like 2 aiming for Arab women, and some of the others can have them coming in. I used to run the unit of preventing domestic violence in Herlin-Karnell, my hometown, not in Haifa. At that time, when I was very, very young in Israel, there was only 18 units like that, and mainly in the periphery. And maybe we had like really third of how we call it, like a half-part-time job, and I was like responsible for almost like 35 families. This is one of our realities as social workers to work in these conditions. So the union is to give therapy direction in the community. The shelters are taking women and children out of their communities, sadly, and to give them shelter and refuge from the harmful, and also, of course, the man or the that needs also help. And I can also link that, of course, to the judicial system in Israel is not working very fine, and also for the law enforcement not working very well with doing justice for these women and or offering help for these men or families that are very violent for them. Thank you.
Thank you all for these very different insight views into your work and into topics touching solidarity in Israel. I think it was a very, very interesting panel. Very happy you came. Thanks again. Have a nice evening. You can stay here with us for having the possibility. There's so many topics that we didn't talk about. We were talking about the struggle of social workers that they face at the moment. Still an ongoing topic, and we didn't talk about it, but our time is unfortunately over. You might be here for some minutes and talk with people that are interested in the topic. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so sorry.
Not saying all the other topics are just dancing.
I really want to over it now, sometimes on the ground, slightly less
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for coming.